The mission was supposed to be a test flight.
Hey guys, I know you're busy, so I don't want to take up much of your time here, but very proud of you.
Strip away the ceremonies, the historic firsts, the photographs, and the speeches, and what you had on paper was a shakedown cruise. 4 astronauts climbing into a capsule that had never carried humans before, riding a rocket that had only launched once without a crew. Flying a trajectory designed primarily to verify that the hardware worked. Go out, swing around the moon, come back, confirm the life support, confirm the navigation.
Loud and clear.
Your trajectory is nominal and your recovery team...
Confirm that Orion could keep 4 people alive in deep space for 10 days.
3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. And liftoff.
That was the job. NASA has been flying test missions since the 1950s. They know how to define objectives and call something a success when primary goals are met. Artemis II had a clear checklist. By any reasonable engineering standard, that checklist was going to be the story. Except it wasn't.
This one, you look at Glushko, and it's just to the north.
What happened during Artemis II, not the parts NASA planned, but the parts they didn't, changed the conversation about the moon in ways that even optimistic mission planners didn't anticipate. Not because anything went wrong, but because when you send human beings somewhere and let them look with their own eyes, the universe shows you things that no instrument array, no orbital camera, and no data pipeline ever prepared you for. This is the story of what NASA didn't expect. Every photograph you have ever seen of the moon shows you a grey world. There are good reasons for this. The moon's surface is dominated by fine-grained dust, produced by billions of years of micrometeorite impacts. That dust, combined with space weathering from solar wind, gives the moon its grey appearance in most photographic processing. The color differences that do exist are subtle, and the processing required to create clean orbital images tends to flatten them further. The Artemis II crew didn't see a grey moon. They saw shades of brown and tan across large portions of the near side. They saw regions with subtle but unmistakable blue tints, associated with specific mineral deposits. They saw the bright white of recent impact ejecta contrasting sharply with the surrounding terrain, now color gradations that no photograph in the existing archive had captured with anything like the fidelity their eyes were registering in real time. Christina Koch was the first to radio down detailed color observations. Mission Control had expected her to describe craters. Instead, she described a landscape that sounded almost Earth-like in its variety, layered and chromatically complex in ways the training materials hadn't prepared her for. The science evaluation room recalibrated quickly. The blue-tinted regions were particularly significant. Lunar scientists already knew that areas associated with ilmenite, an iron-titanium oxide mineral, showed a bluish cast in carefully processed orbital data. But that data had suggested these regions were subtle and localized. What the crew described was a more widespread distribution of bluish coloration, covering larger areas than existing maps indicated. This matters because ilmenite is tied directly to the volcanic history of the near side and is a potential source of oxygen and iron that future lunar bases might extract. If the distribution is larger than current models show, resource maps need to be redrawn before anyone plans extraction operations. The Science Evaluation Room updated the observation priorities while the crew was still in the observation window. The plan that had been months in the making was rewritten on the fly within the first hours of the flyby. That was the first unexpected thing. The Terminator is the boundary between light and shadow on the moon's surface. On Earth, we experience it as twilight, gradual and softened by atmosphere. On the moon, there is no atmosphere. The Terminator is a hard line. Sunlight hits one side of every ridge and crater rim. The other side falls into total darkness. No gradual transition, just light and then nothing. Mission planners had scheduled crew observation time at the Terminator and thought they knew what the crew would see. Victor Glover's reports suggested otherwise. Glover focused significantly on the Terminator and described craters whose shadow depths didn't match the orbital elevation data. The craters weren't different sizes than the maps showed, but the shadow behavior suggested interior topography more complex than digital terrain models indicated. Internal ledges, slumped walls, and floor structure that orbital maps hadn't captured at sufficient resolution. This matters practically. A crater that looks smooth and flat from orbit might have internal drops that make it hazardous to navigate on foot or by rover. What Glover was providing in real time was a fidelity of observation that partially bridged the gap between orbital mapping and ground-level reality. The Science Evaluation Room immediately flagged several craters he described as targets for future high-priority imaging passes. But there was something else along the Terminator that nobody had anticipated. Movement. Glover reported a slow, almost imperceptible brightening and fading along certain portions of the Terminator, happening over several minutes and localized to specific areas. He flagged it and described it carefully, though by the time he had provided enough detail for scientists to begin forming hypotheses, the spacecraft had moved past the relevant area. The leading candidate explanation is electrostatic dust transport. Charged particles levitated from the surface by electrostatic forces along the Terminator boundary, where sunlight creates a sharp differential between charged and uncharged surface areas. This effect has been theorized for years, but never directly confirmed by human visual observation. Apollo astronauts on later missions reported seeing a glowing haze above the lunar horizon at sunrise points that mission controllers largely attributed to optical artifacts. Those reports were never resolved. Glover may have been seeing the same phenomenon. The observation is now in the record and being cross-referenced against available orbital data from the same time window. The fact that a human observer noticed it where no automated system flagged anything is itself an argument for why crewed missions produce a qualitatively different kind of science. During the solar eclipse from lunar orbit, something happened that the mission planners had not included in any observation protocol. The eclipse itself was planned. As Orion passed behind the moon and the sun slid behind the lunar disk, the crew had a checklist of things to document. The solar corona was a priority target. Silhouetting of terrain features against coronal light was expected to provide useful topographic data. What was not on the protocol list? Impact flashes. Both Jeremy Hansen and Reed Wiseman, independently and nearly simultaneously, reported seeing a brief flash of light on the lunar surface during totality. A momentary brightening at a specific location on the far side. flagged by both of them without the other having spoken first. Mission Control asked them to confirm. Both did. A flash confirmed by two independent observers at the same location, and time is almost certainly a meteorite impact. The moon is struck continuously. An estimated 2,800 tons of material fall on it every year. Occasionally, an object large enough to produce a visible flash strikes the surface. Lunar impact flashes have been observed from Earth before. Programs at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and elsewhere have catalogued hundreds of confirmed flashes on the near side. But no human being had ever observed a lunar impact flash from space in lunar orbit during an eclipse. And the location mattered enormously. The flash appeared to be on the far side, a hemisphere that Earth-based programs cannot observe at all because it permanently faces away from us. Every impact flash ever catalogued from Earth has been on the near side. The far side is bombarded at the same rate, but those impacts have never been directly witnessed by a human observer. Until Artemis II. The Marshall Space Flight Center's monitoring team cross-referenced the report with available data. No independent confirmation was possible. No ground-based observatory can see the far side. The observation stands on crew testimony alone. That is not a weakness. It is precisely the argument for why human observers in lunar orbit provide evidence that no robotic system currently deployed can replicate. A proposal to include dedicated impact monitoring cameras on Artemis III is now under review. A direct result of what two astronauts reported seeing through their windows during an observation planned for an entirely different purpose. There is a category of information that NASA doesn't know how to code into a spreadsheet. The agency tracks astronaut psychology carefully. Pre-mission assessments, in-mission monitoring, post-mission debriefs. Mental health and cognitive performance are managed as carefully as spacecraft systems. What NASA did not fully anticipate was the specific effect that seeing Earth from beyond its gravity would have on the crew, and the way that effect would manifest not as distraction, but as a heightened perceptual clarity that directly improved the quality of scientific observation. The overview effect is well documented. Astronauts have described the cognitive shift of seeing Earth as a single, finite object since the earliest orbital missions. But what Artemis II's crew experienced was qualitatively different. In low Earth orbit, your Earth is enormous. It fills most of your visual field. You see coastlines, weather systems, city lights. You are still in a real sense of Earth. From lunar distance, Earth is a different object. It is small. It fits in the palm of your hand held at arm's length. It is a pale blue-white crescent against a sky with no edges. And unlike orbital astronauts who can see home almost any time, the Artemis II crew experienced Earth set. They watched their planet disappear behind the moon. They experienced, briefly but completely, what it means to have no home in the sky. Koch described the experience with precision. She said that without Earth in the sky as a reference point, the moon ceased to be a backdrop and became a landscape. The geological features she was observing stopped being abstract scientific targets and started feeling immediate, real in a way that years of studying photographs had never achieved. The science team noticed a change. The crew's observations during and after Earthset became more detailed and more precisely described than anything from earlier in the flyby. The timestamps of the most scientifically useful observations correlate directly with the Earthset window. Whether this is a genuine, replicable perceptual effect or a coincidence of the observation timeline is something researchers are now studying. But the correlation is documented, and it was not anticipated. Reed Wiseman said during the flyby that the moon looked alive, not poetically, he was specific. He said the surface appeared to have a visual complexity suggesting ongoing process, that it didn't look like a static, dead landscape, but like something still changing. Wiseman is not a geologist. He's a Navy captain and test pilot. But what he described in non-technical language aligned closely with what planetary scientists mean when they talk about the moon as still geologically active. He described what the science already knew, without knowing he was describing it. That convergence was not something mission planners had expected from a test flight. 3 days into the mission, in transit to the moon, a minor solar energetic particle event occurred. Not a major storm. The particle flux was elevated for approximately 6 hours, well within the range Orion's shielding was designed to handle, and well below the threshold requiring any shelter protocol. Mission Control monitored it, logged it, and assessed it as within acceptable parameters. The crew was informed but not alarmed. What made it significant was the timing. The Avatar payload aboard Artemis II contained bone marrow cells cultured from the crew's own blood samples, designed to study how human-derived cells respond to deep space radiation. Mission planners had built the experiment around the expectation of a quiet solar environment, and with the most interesting data expected from background cosmic ray exposure across the 10-day mission. Instead, they got a specific event. A real-time biological response to a real particle burst, captured in human tissue-derived cells at a precise and measurable radiation dose that could be cross-referenced with particle detector data from the spacecraft and solar monitoring satellites across the inner solar system. Early indications are that the cellular response was more rapid and more varied than baseline models had predicted. Certain stress response pathways activated at lower dose thresholds than laboratory experiments had suggested. Others showed delayed or muted responses where activation had been expected. Biology in deep space behaves somewhat differently than ground-based models predicted. Not dramatically, not in ways that suggest the mission was more dangerous than expected, but in ways that will require those models to be updated before crewed missions to Mars can be planned with confidence. This was not supposed to be a major finding. It was supposed to be a baseline data collection exercise. Instead, the crew inadvertently flew through a minor solar event at exactly the right moment to turn a baseline measurement into something closer to a controlled experiment. The mission planners did not arrange this. The sun did. Engineers designing Orion's life support systems ran thousands of simulations before launch. They modeled temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide levels, oxygen consumption, and air circulation for the 10-day mission. The simulations drew on ISS data, Apollo records, and ground-based chamber tests of the actual Orion hardware. In space, one system performed outside its predicted parameters. The carbon dioxide removal system showed a pattern of efficiency variation tied to the crew's activity schedule that ground simulations had not captured. During periods of high physical activity or sustained observation work, CO2 production was naturally higher. The system adjusted, as designed. But the pattern of efficiency loss and recovery between activity cycles differed from what the models had predicted. The system worked, and the crew was never at risk. CO2 levels never approached dangerous thresholds. But the pattern was different enough that engineers at Johnson Space Center identified a gap between simulation and reality that needed closing before Artemis III. The mission that will keep crew in lunar orbit for an extended period with less flexibility to respond to anomalies. The specific issue involves the interaction between the scrubber's thermal management and cabin humidity cycling under actual deep space conditions. Simulations modeled the relationship between these variables as relatively linear. In practice, the system showed non-linear behavior at certain combinations of crew activity and cabin temperature. Brief periods of reduced scrubbing efficiency the models had not predicted. Engineers are rebuilding the relevant simulation using actual flight data from Artemis II. The result will be updated operational procedures for Artemis III. A crewed test flight found something that years of simulation missed. That is exactly what crewed test flights are for. And the lesson is a larger one. No matter how sophisticated the model, the real environment produces behaviors the simulation didn't include. Among the thousands of images taken by the Artemis II crew, there is one that NASA's imaging team did not expect. It wasn't planned. It wasn't on any prioritized observation list. Jeremy Hansen took it during a period when his scheduled target was already being photographed, at a moment when the geometry of the light and the spacecraft's position produced a view no camera had ever been aimed at before. The image shows a section of the far side southern hemisphere in the outer reaches of the South Pole Aitken Basin, photographed at a sun angle and from a perspective no orbital camera had previously captured. The SPA basin is so large that cameras imaging it from directly above inevitably flatten the perception of depth. From directly overhead it looks enormous but abstract, a circular feature on a map. From the angle Hansen photographed it, with the sun at a low oblique angle casting long shadows across the basin floor and rim structures, the image conveys something no existing photograph had conveyed before: genuine depth. The visceral sense of how far down the floor sits relative to the surrounding terrain, how high the rim mountains stand. The image shows the basin not as a map feature but as a physical place. A scar so deep that its rim mountains cast shadows stretching hundreds of kilometers across the floor below. When the image was processed, the planetary science team's response was immediate. Several researchers described it as the most geologically informative single photograph of the South Pole Aitken Basin ever taken. Not because it revealed new features, those were already in the orbital datasets, but because the perspective transformed abstract data into visible geological reality in a way that processed orbital imagery had never achieved. The image has been submitted to the planetary science literature and is being used in presentations to stakeholders, making decisions about where to direct future missions on the far side. A single, unplanned photograph, taken at an unscheduled moment, is shaping real decisions about real mission trajectories. Artemis II splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on April 10th, 2026. The crew was recovered in good health. The spacecraft was intact. By every engineering metric, the mission was a success. What has already changed is the planning for every subsequent Artemis mission. Artemis III is now being planned with crew observation protocols that didn't exist in the original mission design. The lesson from Artemis II, that human eyes produce scientifically distinct information that automated systems don't replicate, has been formalized. Future crews will carry structured frameworks for observing visual phenomena, color variations, surface dynamics, and terminator behavior, built specifically around the kinds of things Artemis II showed were findable when someone was actually looking. The radiation data from the Avatar payload has been shared with Mars mission planning teams and international partners. Updated biological response models will affect how long-duration deep space missions are designed and how crew radiation limits are set. The revised thresholds will change the conservative margins built into exposure limits for every crewed deep space mission that follows. The ECLSS performance data is being integrated into updated simulations at Johnson Space Center. The computational gap between ground model and flight performance has been identified, and the correction is underway. Artemis III's crew will benefit from it without ever knowing there was a gap to begin with. The impact flash observation has generated a formal instrument proposal for dedicated monitoring cameras on Artemis II. If approved and flown, the methodology traces directly back to Hansen and Wiseman, reporting what they saw through their windows during an observation planned for an entirely different purpose. And the crew's descriptions: Glover on the hidden complexity along the Terminator, Koch on the unexpected color of the surface, Wiseman on the apparent aliveness of the landscape, Hansen on the silhouetted rim structures during the eclipse, are now direct inputs into landing site selection models for Artemis 3 and 4. The way shadows pool unexpectedly in crater interiors, the way color variations map to mineral distributions that standard processing had understated, the way the Terminator reveals terrain complexity that orbital mapping had smoothed over. None of these were supposed to be outputs of a shakedown cruise. There's a tendency in space coverage to treat the expected and the unexpected as opposites. A mission either goes as planned or something goes wrong. Discoveries are either announced in advance or they emerge from failure. Artemis II doesn't fit that framework. Nothing went wrong. The mission achieved every primary objective. The crew was safe, the spacecraft performed, the hardware was validated. By the engineering definition, it was a clean test flight. And simultaneously, in ways that no one fully predicted, it changed what we know about the Moon, changed the planning for every future Artemis mission, captured biological data that will affect the safety of crewed missions to Mars, produced the most geologically informative photograph of the solar system's largest known impact basin, and generated multiple unexpected scientific observations from crew members doing nothing more than looking out the windows. The unexpected things weren't surprises in the sense of failures. They were surprises in the sense that the universe consistently contains more than our models of it. The Moon is more complex than orbital data suggested. Biology in deep space behaves differently than ground simulations predicted. Engineering systems have behaviors that only reveal themselves in the actual operational environment. Human observers produce information that no automated system generates. You build the best models you can. You simulate everything you're able to simulate. You design for every contingency you can imagine. And then you go. And the real environment teaches you things that no model covered. Artemis II went to the Moon to test a spacecraft. It came back having tested something larger, the proposition that there is still an enormous amount we don't know about the place we've been watching our entire existence as a species, and that the way to find out what we're missing is to keep going back, with human eyes, genuine curiosity, and the discipline to notice when what you're seeing doesn't match what you expected. Victor Glover said after the mission that the Moon is a real place. He was right. And Artemis II's most lasting contribution may be the careful, documented demonstration of exactly how much reality is still waiting there to be found. The next crew is already training.